Good evening, all, and welcome to this NSA webinar where we'll be discussing what makes a successful lambing. We're joined this evening by Fiona Lovatt and Emma Harle, and I'd ask if you could direct any questions that you might have to the Q&A, and we can pick these up at the end of the presentations. If you are interested, we do have some in-person events coming up with similar topics, and the details can be found in the chat. Also, if you are a ROSA member, please put your name and number in the chat. But I'll hand you over now to Fiona.
Brilliant. Thanks ever so much, Emma. So it's a great pleasure today to be running this webinar. I'm mainly doing this with my Sheep Antibiotic Guardian group hat on, but I'm really wanted to introduce a great friend, Emma Harle, who I've been working with for the last 5 or 6 years, and we're going to base most of this webinar around the last 6 years working with Emma. But I thought, Emma, can you just introduce yourself to start off with? Tell us about your flock near Durham.
Yep. So I'm based up in County Durham, and we're about 5 miles out of Durham City itself. Business is Charles Harle and Sons. It's a family partnership, quite a complicated one, which I came back into having worked outside of farming. So I left university and went to work elsewhere, completely different industry in a completely different way. And did that for about various jobs with component distribution, so very different. And then got the urge to get more involved in the family business. So I came home in 2015, started basically understanding what was going on in the office. And then in 2016, got much more involved in the livestock enterprises, which is what I was mostly interested in anyway. We're a traditional mixed farm. We have arable as well as suckler cows. And at the minute, we run about 1,800 Aberfield Cross Highlanders. As you'll see later on, that's transitioned away from some other breeds based on what was happening within the business in 2017. And we lamb everything inside. We, as of 2 years ago, have some lovely great sheds that help us do that. And then the ewes and lambs get turned out once they're big enough and strong enough. And we lamb sort of third week of March, we start lambing.
Thanks, Emma. So we first met back in 2017, I think, which time you had just over 2,000 mule ewes. At that time, every lamb at birth was given both an injection and an oral dose of antibiotics, wasn't it? Yep. And the first thing we didn't have a load of figures between us, did we? So I think you'd had somebody working you weren't scanning. You were scanning up to then, but then not getting figures after that. Was that right?
We were scared at the time. Say again. Say that again. Sorry.
So you were scanning in the few years before that, but then more than that, there wasn't a huge amount of figures.
That's right. So we were scanning, but I personally didn't have those scanning figures, but I obviously knew what we were selling. So really, it was only 2017 figures that I had to try and understand what was happening and how productive our ewes were.
And so we did, but you had the scan figures for 2017. You knew what was expected, a high scanning percentage, and you knew what you had alive in May, and you knew what you sold. So we could do very basic figures, but we wanted a little more detail because you were very keen to use medicines more responsibly, but you were very keen to drive down mortality as well, increase survivability, weren't you? So the first thing we talked about.
So I
go on, sorry.
Well, all I was going to say is I couldn't understand, based on me coming back home, hadn't done many lambings before. I couldn't understand why, when looking at other people's figures, and especially benchmarking figures, why we were losing a quarter of our lambs from scanning to sale. And on top of that, we were using all the antibiotics we seemed to be given to prevent whatever it was we were trying to prevent. And to me, just things weren't quite adding up, Fiona, I would say, probably.
Yes, I think that year it was about £4,000 worth of antibiotics was going into neonatal lambs, something like that. So anyway, we looked at these kind of lambing records with tally system, and you've got a large workforce at Lambing Time, and we just thought straight away something even as simple as a tally system was too complicated, wasn't it? We didn't think we could get traction within the lambing staff to complete this sort of thing at what is a busy time of year. So we moved on very quickly, ditched that idea, and we had our simple neonatal counting system. Just explain what you did here, Emma.
So yeah, we needed it. I should say we have quite a few staff around the lambing sheds and Lambing Time, and we also have a night shift. And I was very keen on, if we were going to ask them to do something, then it had to be really simple and very clear. And this is what we came up with, which was literally, and it's not a pleasant sight, and can be soul destroying, but I can't tell you how important it was for us to have 3 bins, 3 dumpy bags, it ended up being, each with a clicker counter on top, for 3 different categories of lambs around Lambing Time, 3 different categories of dead lambs around Lambing Time. So one is wet death. So, you know, self-explanatory. It was never viable. It never breathed. It was game over basically as soon as it came out. Dry dead, we categorized as it did breathe, it did stand, mother licked it, but for whatever reason it faded away within 48 hours was typically the rule. And then field death is everything that seemed to be strong enough to get turned out, and then was either made a pet and died within the pet department, or it was literally brought back in off the field dead. But it had gone through that sort of 48 hours, 72 hours critical period, and we thought everything was all right with that lamb, basically. And then it died. And so the team...
It sort of gave us...
Sorry, the team...
It gave us a bit more detail, didn't it, on the difference between when the lambs were dying as to actually, so we could focus in on where the issues were happening, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So that second graph there with the same colour coding, back in 2018, there were still a large number of deaths, but you could see where the details were with this sort of filing system.
Yeah, absolutely.
So having done at least something looking at the data, we then so that comes into the data and the details. We needed to look at what were the disease threats. So why was this flock giving antibiotics both by injection and orally to those baby lambs? You know, there was a good reason for that. We know that a vet had said that at some time. No one at the farm had made that up. They were doing it for a reason. And then we looked at how we could avoid that high use of antibiotics, and then we're going to talk through process, the teamwork involved, and the communication. And so this is the kind of balance between the threats and specifically here it was watery mouth and joint till that we're particularly worried about. But on the other side of the balance, could we plan, prevent and protect? Could we make sure the ewe's nutrition is right, get colostrum right, and make sure hygiene was right? But before we go into that a bit, I just want to discuss the use of antibiotics, because we have been on quite a journey. We have nationally been on a journey, and not everyone necessarily agrees with where we are now. But just to remind people, so back in 2017, when the Edinburgh vet students were out on lambing placements, they recorded 68% of the flocks they were working with using oral antibiotics just in case, and a quarter of the flocks using injectable antibiotics on all lambs. You know, what was happening at Harle Farms was no different to many other flocks in the country. And about the same time, I was working with PhD student Eliana. We had 2 surveys, large numbers of farms, 660 farms in the first year. So these are farms supplying a retailer, so they're from all over the country. And we asked people, do you give oral antibiotics to your lambs? And over a quarter were giving them to every single lamb on the farm, just in case. It was slightly less numbers in 2017, but still very high numbers. You know, it was very much the norm. Now, and some people really wish they could still do that. Some people really can't understand why we can't use antibiotics in this way. So these next 2 slides just describe that to some reason. This is some graphs which you may have seen before. Jennifer Duncan from Liverpool published in the Vet Record back in 2019. But here on these 6 small graphs, we are actually looking at 6 different farms. And we're looking at all these different antibiotics. If there's a large bar, this is the proportion of E. coli. So E. coli is a bug that causes watery mouth that are resistant to these antibiotics. So if we look at this farm down here, every single one of these antibiotics, bar just a couple, have either half the bugs resistant, half the bugs are resistant to the antibiotics, or right across the full board. So this farm 9 is not able to turn to another antibiotic to deal with watery mouth. We don't have anywhere else to go. And that is a situation that people will end up with. It's inevitable. This next slide is really distressing, just as a warning. This was shared with me by a colleague at the International Sheep Vets last spring. This is watery mouth in a group of lambs born on a dairy farm. And I'm going to play this video. And the video shows 4 pens. This first pen is lambs that are 6 hours old. The second pen is 12 hours old. Third pen is 18 hours. And the last pen, they're 24 hours old lambs. So this is at 12 hours. This is at 18 hours. And this is what the lambs look like at 24 hours. And, you know, 80% of those lambs are dead. And the ones that aren't dead are looking really, really ill. And the man who showed me this video was asking me what I suggested they did. And so I turned to him, I said, well, you know, what are you currently doing? What, are you giving them antibiotics? And he said, if we treat with antibiotics at birth, the situation's worse. So even the lambs that are alive but ill, we can't revive them. They just have no bugs left to fight off the resistant E. coli. So if there's any one thing that makes me think we are absolutely right to be supporting farmers wean themselves off antibiotics for baby lambs, this video, you know, I have never seen a situation this bad on a British farm, and I never want to. And I hope the work that we've been doing over the last few years and will continue to do will help people, you know, manage antibiotics in a better way. But we'll go back from that. I find that such a distressing video. We'll go back to the situation at Harle's farm, and these are basically figures from 2018 right up to last year. And in 2018, which was the first year we got the figures, we can see there was still a lot of deaths in the lambs. Explain here, Emma, I know after 2 weeks, we had some very serious soul searching between us, didn't we?
Yes. So, so having understood where we were after, so 2018 was the first year of counting dead lambs. And it was also the first year of having the conversation about our antibiotic usage. And like I said before, we have a lot of team members, and it became clear that what we had thought we had communicated prior to lambing, which was in the meeting prior to lambing, we communicated, which was that we had thought we communicated that we really shouldn't need so much antibiotic. We really need to think about how we're using antibiotic. Don't use antibiotic unless this, unless that, unless the other. What would seem to have happened is that the team had really gone cold turkey on antibiotic usage, which may have been okay, but probably at the same time, we didn't focus on the colostrum element. So we'd cut out antibiotics, but likewise hadn't tipped the balance with proper colostrum care, I call it. So it became clear, and it was shocking but brilliant, because in those first 10 days of 2018 lambing, that bag of dry dead lambs was filling up awfully quickly at almost the same rate as the wet bag. And my call it naivety or intuition, I don't know which one it is, I didn't understand why we would get nearly as many dry dead lambs as wet dead lambs. Surely if they were alive, we should be able to keep them alive. So it triggered a reset meeting. No one had done anything wrong. It's just my communication hadn't been good enough to say, we're not doing this. And at the same time as we're not doing this, we have got to be doing that, which is about colostrum. And pet lambs were going down. We lost 100 pet lambs, and we can get on to the number of pet lambs we have, but we lost 100 pet lambs within the first 2 weeks. And I always think that the pet lambs are a very good example of what's actually going on at lambing time. And if it's happening in the pet lambs, then it's happening everywhere else. So it just caused a reset meeting where we talked about, actually, you might need some antibiotics here, but what are you doing about colostrum? And it was a good reset meeting to have.
Yeah. And we're going to come on to colostrum and exactly what you do. Just before then, I'm going to, so I know there will be people listening who already, or who still themselves are wanting to treat every lamb at birth. You might have neighbours who do, you might, and there are still vets who would really, really like it if they could be selling treatments for every single lamb. We are not allowed to routinely prophylactically treat lambs just in case. That is not appropriate. So last year we had a number of webinars, and so I just thought I would share this slide again. So the core rules, and Emma's talked about it there. We need to focus on colostrum. We need to focus on ewe nutrition, about making sure their body condition scores right, that the ewes are looked after, and hygiene at lambing. And we can't give any antibiotic to every single lamb, for, that is just not appropriate. But what we may be able to do is target it. And there are occasions where we do need to use antibiotics, but we use them in a targeted way. So there is very clear guidance for vets, what they can prescribe, why they can prescribe it, and how to work out which antibiotics are appropriate, whether they want to import something, or whether the order of the seriousness of antibiotics. So just reminding people about that. It's still available. You can still access it. And if you are either unsure or your vet is, then please do point them to that Sheep Vet Society, Sheep Antibiotic Guardian group advice. But I'm going to go back to colostrum because this is where once once we'd realised that going to cold turkey on it was not the way to do it, and we were all a bit shocked, and we did a massive reassessment, didn't we, Emma? And just really, we went into and I've talked about it with people before, but plan ahead. Since then, we've made incremental progress each year, and just in the last couple of years, we now you have a TMI sort of I think nutrition. I'm more confident about it now than I've ever been, that we know the ewes are getting enough, they're getting good colostrum. We're talking about that now in preparation for March. Preventing issues are always important, so shelter comes into that, but hygiene and disinfection comes in, and then protect the lamb, and colostrum is the way to protect the lamb, and if the ewe is not fit and well fed, she will not produce brilliant colostrum. So this has been a focus for us back since then in 2018. This is a whole story of we've all been on this journey. Nationally, we have plenty of people listening to this webinar have been talking about these things with their vets since 2017, 2018. But Emma, so with colostrum, I know you did a massive bit of work back then in 2018, but you've refined it a bit since then. So just say a bit more about what you do for colostrum at the moment, Emma.
Yeah, I just if I just go back to 2018 really briefly, those 100 that died within the first 2 weeks, they were pet lambs, and the majority would have been the third lamb off a triplet. So again, that tells me more likely to have succumbed from not enough colostrum, the weaker child. But so yes, so we having had a bit of an epiphany about maybe our lambs aren't getting enough colostrum, maybe the triplets aren't getting enough colostrum, maybe the colostrum is not good enough. We relied really heavily on powdered stuff, powdered colostrum, and I think that has really helped where we were at back then. But we have since evolved. In the last 2 years, we have been identifying ewes that can spare a bit of colostrum with the bricks refractometer, so I'm working my way around the pictures here, but using a handheld sort of milking device to strip the colostrum out of a ewe that has spare, testing it, and then either using it straight away on other lambs that need it, as long as it is good enough, or refrigerating it basically. So that's something that the team have done, did fantastically last year and started the year before, really, getting used to that sort of process.
And just at this moment, I just wanted, there are 2 questions that have already come in specifically on using colostrum. One of them is, will tubing a lamb with artificial colostrum have a negative effect in that the lamb will not have its mother's colostrum in the time frame? And I do think that is sometimes the case. So I have come across farms where they are absolutely religious about getting colostrum in by tubing lambs, and they're causing themselves more problems by either tubing lambs with inferior colostrum, and out of the powders, some of the powders are good, some of the powders are dreadful, and even the good powders are only half as good as a mother's own colostrum. So that's where Emma's talking about. Powders are a tool, but they're nothing like as good as another ewe within the flock, or even using a cow colostrum. I would personally prefer that to powder. Somebody else asked what the hand milking device is, and that is an Udderly ease. It costs about £130. Is that right, Emma?
I think, yeah,
I have to say 150 every time I show somebody this in a farmers meeting and say it costs 150 quid. People look incredulous and not sure I could go for that. But I have never yet met someone who has bought one and regretted it. They make Fiona, such a massive difference, don't they, for harvesting colostrum?
We have 3 now.
Okay. Yes, I mean, there is brilliant. So once you understand the value about how incredibly valuable ewe's own colostrum is compared to either the powder or I actually a cattle colostrum is okay. I would not use colostrum from a single cow. I'd like to pool it because there are certain cows that have anti-sheep antibodies in their colostrum and will cause lamb anemia. But to either pool cattle colostrum, if you are using cattle colostrum, absolutely make sure it's day 1 colostrum. So a dairy farmer will call the first 4 days worth colostrum. That's no good. It's got to be day 1, whether it's from a ewe or a cow. It deteriorates quickly, and but harvest off other ewes if the flock, if possible, and use the bricks, as you can see up here, to test its quality. You can store it in the fridge, freshly in the fridge, for a week. So make sure if you are putting some in a clean yogurt pot or whatever into the fridge, then put a date on it and make sure you rotate the stock. So you always use the older colostrum first. And if you need it to last longer than a week, then freeze it. But if you're going to defrost it, don't do it in the microwave. You need to defrost it gradually, which means freeze it in small pots. So a lot of people will use human breast milk sachet, containers, which is a really good sterile way of storing a small amount in the freezer, which works well. Anything else we've forgotten to say about colostrum that you can think of, Emma?
Nope.
I think protein in the last couple of weeks of pregnancy. So energy is massively important for the whole of the last 2 months of pregnancy, but absolutely the last 2 weeks we cannot be deficient in protein. And I sometimes find, and the study we did on a load of Welsh ewes the year before last showed that sometimes single ewes have poorer colostrum, and that's, I think, because often single ewes, people don't attend to their protein requirements in late pregnancy, and a ewe cannot put protein into a growing lamb and put enough protein into colostrum and sort out her own immunity, which is why we see a rise in worm egg counts in ewes at the point of lambing. They just haven't got enough protein because we're not feeding them enough. If we make sure we've got the diet sorted with sufficient protein, especially in that last 2 weeks of pregnancy, we're much better off for colostrum. Right, let's go back to our figures. And I'm going to ask you to talk through the red first. So massive improvements in 2019, Emma.
Yeah, so what we learned in 2018 set us up really nicely to know what it was that we're going to focus on in 2019, which was colostrum and a measured use of antibiotics. So, so hugely thrilled with what the team managed to do in 2019. Shall I go on?
Yep, go on. 2020.
Yep. So 2020, so those are the green bars. You can see some, slight improvement, but nothing significant. 2020 was about just getting through COVID, as I'm sure it was for everyone else. We didn't know whether we would have people off work. We certainly didn't have anyone coming in to help us, so it was just the core team staff. So it was just survival. Team did fantastic given that. And
then we had a blip in 2021. What happened? Why did 2021 go wrong?
So 2021, on reflection, we drifted into 2021. So what do I mean by that? I had no plan. I just thought we'd carry on doing what we were doing and it would get better. And we had no pre-lambing meeting. I gave the team no areas that I'd like to focus on. We just basically started lambing, and nothing went backwards in a huge way, but certainly I got myself very frustrated that things weren't improving again. I managed to frustrate people. We had joint ill because we were tagging lambs at birth, so that was a frustration. It just, I learned a lot about what not to do for 2022, basically. It wasn't good not
so you
to
described
have a plan.
it to me. You described it to me before that you were working nights, and then the team would come in the morning, and you'd have a, you know, frustrated that you were losing a lot of lambs. You'd have a team session then, and everyone was just wanting to get on with the day, and it just didn't quite. The team wasn't quite working together. But
no, there weren't. And whilst I thought I was being fairly decent about everything, I just think my frustration was probably coming out, and the team were doing the best they could, and that's the bottom line. They were doing the best they could, so it just wasn't. It wasn't a good. It was all right. All the team is still here, so it wasn't that bad. But it just wasn't. And the figures weren't bad, but we just didn't improve again. So
no. But one of the things is you started ear tagging, didn't you? And you did see joint ill. I think that was the year that Ben came out and post-mortem some lambs, like all the dead lambs for a day, and you found that you'd had some navel in and some joint ill, didn't you?
Yeah, we did. So we probably, I would say in previous years, we could probably count joint ill on two hands, so less than, you know, 5 or 8 cases of joint ill in previous years. But as soon as we started tagging at birth to link them to their mum, we probably had about 35 cases of joint ill. So that was distressing. But Ben, who does all our post-mortems, came out and opened up probably about 15 lambs for us that we'd collected up, and at least a third of those lambs was something to do with navel ill. So that was fascinating to understand that, you know, and they were quite often the field lambs as well. So not necessarily the dry lambs, but the field lambs coming back in, a third of those were with navel ill.
Right. So this slide just explains why tagging can cause an increase in joint ill. So we know most joint ill is caused by Strep dysgalactiae, by far the biggest majority, 60-70% of joint ill. And a carrier ewe will have that in her birth canal. She'll have it on her teats, in her milk. As the lamb passes through the birth canal, the whole of the outside of the lamb is coated in Strep dysgalactiae. So then anyone who lambs that ewe, it then has it all over their hands. If you go straight to deal with stomach tubes, to milk out the ewe, you're passing that bacteria onto everything you touch. So dirty hands are a massive factor. You can pass it if you've lambed a carrier ewe, and then that hand goes straight into another ewe, or you've passed it, you may have even infected another ewe. We know, we used to think joint ill was something that happened in dirty, wet lambing sheds. Actually, Strep dysgalactiae survives very well on clean, dry straw. And I have seen really bad joint ill cases in absolutely immaculate lambing sheds. So, you know, because of the high number of carrier ewes and this factor that that anything, this lamb that's come through a carrier ewe is coated in joint ill, and the Strep dysgalactiae bug. Anything that pierces the skin, so anything that could travel through the navel, if you tube, or the lamb could get it through the mouth. It's particularly if you inject it by tagging, or as you put a ring on, both either castration or docking, any of those routes can introduce that Strep dysgalactiae into the lamb. So things to do: stringent hygiene, wearing gloves and washing hands are hugely important, and making sure all equipment is sterile. So the fact that Strep dysgalactiae survives well on dry straw, it also survives very well on a dusty windowsill. So if you're lambing, your tubes or your bottles or your teats or your ear tags are sat up on a dusty windowsill, and you're not disinfecting them before they go into the animal, into the lamb, you will be transmitting joint ill. We also sometimes see it out in field, and it could well be that one of the lambs that's picked it up and has the bugs all over the outside of it is put into a trailer as you leave a lambing shed, and that lamb has infected the whole trailer with Streptococcus galactii. Every single lamb that goes in there then picks up those bugs on the outside of the lamb. So that's what, when we're investigating joint ill, we go through things with an absolute fine-tooth comb, and there's number of different things that can increase the amount of joint ill. So for Emma, it was ear tagging that kicked it off. You know, for other people, other things. I think you started double dipping navels, didn't you, Emma?
Yes.
To start off with,
yeah.
And sometimes we have to use injectable antibiotics in that group, and that can be important. What it absolutely doesn't mean, just because we've had to turn to antibiotics in 1 year in a group of lambs, it does not mean that in future years on that farm, injecting every lamb is a thing to do. And when they've done studies, they did a big study previously. There are some farms which have repeated joint ill, and something like 40% of those farms are injecting every single lamb. They still have a massive joint ill problem. So do not think you have to inject every lamb, otherwise you'll get joint ill, because that is simply not the case. We have plenty of flocks where we don't inject every lamb. They used to have a joint ill problem, but we've got away from it. What is important is navel treatments. The navel must be dry. We always used to recommend 10% iodine with alcohol in it for drying. And I would always suggest you use iodine or similar on a tag, and on the surface of the ear, and on the tag, and on the rings. Last year, as plenty of people know, iodine was quite hard to get hold of. It was costing 3 or 4 times what it usually does, because we had a shortage of joint ill. And Emma was actually involved. I thought we'd just put this one slide in. We're working with a company, a spin-out company from Cambridge University, because we were really worried about the shortage of iodine last year. This company have got a formulation so that they're a group of chemists. There's plenty of science behind it. So a product that uses alcohol and shellac, which apparently my daughters tell me is what you have in nail varnish, and metal salts, so it has good antimicrobial and drying activities. We tried it last year on some of your later lambs, didn't we, Emma? On a few of your... We didn't have it available till the end of April last year, so it was only the very later lambs. This is just to show you, when you haven't got lambs there, this is to show you the product with sausages, chipolatas. This is what the Novax navel looks like, and this is 10% iodine equivalent at the point of dipping the pretend navel, which is actually a chipolata. Only 3 hours later, the iodine is not still there. It doesn't have long effect. Now, we've used iodine, we've used it for years and years, and we know 10% iodine will work. Sometimes we have to use it again, dip it again. Certainly the shellac in the Novax seems to make it last better. We know in work on piglets that drying is the important factor in iodine. This is using bits of bacon. This bit of bacon looks as if it's been sat there for 4 hours. Not many people would cook a bit of bacon that sat out for 4 hours. It look a bit dry. If it's been treated in iodine, it's looking really dry 4 hours later. If it's treated in Novax, it's looking very dry, even drier. So I think it's quite an exciting product, especially if we lose iodine, because that's a very serious worrying situation. We're actually, and this there might be people watching this webinar, if you are due to start lambing inside in the next week or so, couple of weeks, and you also ear tag all your lambs early, and you record them to sort of Signet standards. So it's easier for us to use data that's stored on border software, but if you're recording lambs, we can use others, but I know I can get the data out of border software. If you're prepared to take part in a simple trial with this product, then please do put your contact details in the chat. I'd love to get back in touch with you. So the trials we're doing at the moment, people are treating alternate lambs, putting an odd tag in their iodine lamb and an even tag in their no-backs lamb, so we can get some really good data on it. So just let me know if you're at all interested in helping us in the trial. So it's basically people lambing soon and doing good recording. So that's just that. Let's go back to Harle Farms and your data, Emma, because we're now up to last year, and I would say for 2022, it was concentrating on marginal gains. So this business about there isn't one single thing to do, but let's make sure we improve everything as much as possible. And I'm going to, so this next photo, Emma is the person I work with who does the best pre-lambing meeting. These are photos of the lambing meeting and some of Emma's slides. I don't know any other shepherds who put slides of Einstein up and get their lambing staff to. But Emma, you talk through your lambing team meeting.
Yeah, well, so to go back to 2021, when I realised that we just drifted in, we didn't have any meeting, we didn't have any goals, we didn't have anything else we wanted to try. I was frustrated with what I seen on. I realised that it was all going to be about marginal gains, and that's a bit of a cliche, but it was. And also, I wasn't sure that the team were all understanding the same processes and running the same processes, and I didn't know if they knew what my process would be. And I realized that also actually what I thought the best process should be might not actually be the best process, because at the end of the day, they were the people that were doing the lambing. So we brainstormed, we played a game, which is in the bottom right. And the game was all about helping them understand about how important communication was around the lambing shed, and how guidelines were important, and how everyone playing on the same rule book was very important. And once they understood the how, if people aren't coming at things from the same viewpoint, or they don't know what the process is, or they don't know why they're doing the process, the game helped them understand how it could go wrong really quickly. And that then led us into getting them, along with Fiona and our other vets, to redefine all process themselves and pay attention to some of the key things around the lambing process that make the difference. Understanding all the data behind that ewe. We'd always had blackboards on our lambing pens for which we could write data down, but I don't think people really understood why they were being asked to do that. They didn't understand necessarily the timelines that were involved. They didn't understand, they couldn't communicate with each other about what was going on in that pen. And just as much as it's really important to understand what you need to do with that ewe and lamb in that pen, it's also really important to understand what you don't need to do with that ewe and lamb in that pen. So they came up with their process, their guidelines, rules about what information. I see it like a maternity board. What information goes on that board about what is going on in that pen? And once they know that information, how can they really quickly and really visually see what is needed to be done? So they came up with, I don't know if you can see on the lambing pens, as well as the blackboards with a load of information on, there's some little orange straps, and they're like high vis straps. They came up with a process where they would put different color straps on the pen based on an action that needed to be taken. And it's so very visual, so they don't need to stand there and read everything on the board if there's no action to be taken. It's just her information, that ewes and lambs information. But those orange bands on those lambing pens, they're the ones that they need to go and seek out and do something. So they designed a load of, not a load of colors, but we have orange for taken action. There's something going on, you need to intervene, whatever that might be. There's a yellow band that we put on, which for them means that ewe and lamb has been in that pen for under 6 hours. We need to go back within 6 hours and make sure everything's okay and it's titted and it's got its colostrum and its navel is double dipped for a second time. They have a blue band that they put on if there's a potential adoption lamb within that pen so that we can use it for adoption. They put a silver band on if the ewe's got loads of colostrum and we can go and harvest from her. So it's just a very quick way of looking across 100 lambing pens and seeing what has to be done. And they run it, it's their process, and it really transformed their process, and they agree. It really, and actually the guidelines put in place were adhered to on the whole. It caused the results in 2022, which was brilliant.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Emma. That explains it, and explains how all the team came up with how it would work, and they really worked together on it. I can remember those sessions. And so, by having had so much success in 2022, I remember before lambing started last year, this is what you wanted to focus on, wasn't it? This 73 field deaths. And bit of a spoiler alert here in that because I've got the 2023 figures and we made a dramatic difference in those deaths. So having now told everyone it was concentrating on the pet lambs, I'm going to now show the slide that you showed at the 2022 lambing meeting. And this you put this slide up, didn't you, Emma? So talk us through this slide as you did in that meeting.
Okay, so in 2022 we reduced the dry deaths, and with data, and it is all about data, but with data, I couldn't understand why the field deaths, we've never made an impact on the field deaths. So I drilled into the data, and I shared with the team that from 2022, 40 out of those 73 field deaths were pet lambs. Basically, you send it down into the pet lamb department. It's not a good place to be. 30, and I'm trying to put it in perspective for them. So 30 died out of 3,000 lambs that were turned out into the field. But 65 died out of, and it's a huge number of pet lambs, I appreciate that, but 65 died out of 372 pets, which is 17%. So you've got a chance of dying, go outside, and you've got a 17% chance of dying if you get taken off your mum and made a pet lamb. And that's what I said to them. I said, you're 17 times more likely to die if you become a pet in the first 6 weeks. And you're probably twice as likely to die after 6 weeks. And 11% of all our expected lambs became pets. And it's something we had never focused on in the past. We'd only focused on mortality. We hadn't focused on why we're having so many pets. So this was their task in 2023, to look at the whole pet lamb process. And whilst I don't have a slide on it, we categorized why every pet lamb had been made a pet lamb, whether her mother had died, whether she'd had 4 and it was just simply too much for her, whether she had a blind teat and we had to take something off. Whatever it was, we now have the data to show why we're taking pet lambs off. But again, it was the team's process, the team's work together to process in place to minimize the number of pets. And again, they did a fantastic process. They came up with some really neat ideas. We talked about having an ICU and intensive care unit. But every time, and the reason there's a Formula One picture up there is, if my belief is if you keep on doing the same things, you're going to keep on getting the same results. And it's so important for us in our business, and certainly within the lambing team, to understand what happened the year before and see what we can do to improve it. And we are going to plateau, but we still got plenty of scope to improve things. So that's why I committed every time we go into lambing time, we have a full-blown meeting about what we're doing. And it's the team that has the input, and it's their lambing time.
One of the other things you did, Emma, I know you've got one of your members of staff is brilliant at looking after pet lambs, isn't she? She does a really good job. I know you moved her from the pet lamb department into the main lambing shed to her job became how to do a brilliant job in keeping lambs on their mum, rather, because the rest of the team were thinking that's okay, we can make a pet and it can go down the road and be looked after really well. It's just everything's against them once it's a pet lamb, isn't it? However good your members of staff are.
Yeah.
So it was partly pulling her back and keeping them on their mums, wasn't it?
Definitely, and just giving them time. And I think we all at lambing time, understandably so, we all are so busy, there's so much to do, and it's about how efficient can we get the process that people aren't doing what they don't need to do, and duplicating things. People are doing what they should be doing, but also the right person doing the right job. And I think what some of the cases were is because we were so stressed out about things, it was easier to create a pet than persist with giving it a chance. And that has had a reversal this last year, and the results show that.
Well, here's your results from last year. I mean, you reduced from nearly 300 pet lambs in 2022 to 92 last year, so it's pretty much a third. And then the ones that died also many less. So the figures speak for themselves. And if you hadn't put that effort into gathering them with figures early on, you would not only not be able to talk about what you'd done, but you wouldn't know where to focus your energies. And I think that really comes out well. Thank you very much.
Yeah, the team, they can't wait to see these numbers.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? They're looking to see what's happening, how many. We still do the counting dead lambs, so we've still got the dumpies and the clickers and all this, that, and the other. And we have a bacon sandwich at 9 o'clock every morning. And quite often people saying, what's it looking like? What's it looking at? And like, hang on, just we'll get to it when we get to it. But they're looking to see the numbers. They're looking to see how what they've come up with has made a difference.
Yeah, every single one of them is involved and taking ownership and is proud of where you've got to. Yeah, yep. It's brilliant. It's a brilliant story. Thank you ever so much. I'm just we have got a few questions to answer, but I just this is my last slide, and I just wanted to share it because it's quite topical. But unfortunately, within the last couple of weeks, we've been seeing a number of cases of Schellenberg virus, and there's just been a webinar. It started at 6 o'clock tonight. I started watching that one and I had to flick across to do this one. There's details about Schellenberg on the webinar. You can find it on the Rumen Health and Welfare page. Certainly there are 2 flocks that were lambing. I was dealing with lambing at the beginning of January. One of them's reported 22% losses due to Schellenberg. The other one up to 40% losses of lambs born. Now it's much worse in early lambing flocks, but please don't necessarily assume that that's what it is, because if you are seeing fetal deformities, there is pre-testing offered by the APHA, and I know my colleague Rachel Tarlington at Nottingham we are putting together a survey, so gathering information from people is helpful, and please do share your experiences. It's really devastating when you start having deformed lambs born. but there are people out there who care and want to know, and we want to try and do something about it. We know that the midges that spread Schellenberg are the same midges that spread blue tongue, and we're really concerned about blue tongue next year. So do take it seriously and speak with your vet, and they will help you know what to look for and what to do about that. So sorry to share bad news. What's been a really positive story, but we're worried about Schellenberg, we're worried about blue tongue, and there is lots and lots of information on the Ruminant Health and Welfare page, and it's all under blue tongue virus pages, but do access that. They're freely available, and if you go to Ruminant Health and Welfare group, you can access all those. So please do. So I'm going to have to turn to all these questions, but just in the first instance, thank you ever so much, Emma, for sharing your story. It's really inspiring, and yeah, you're doing a fantastic job, and we really appreciate how sharing that with others. So as we look at some of these questions, somebody asked about a good alternative bedding instead of straw. I know there are some farmers who will absolutely swear by shavings instead of straw, and so that's a possibility for considering. Straw is great. Always consider the knee test for straw. Do not wear your waterproof trousers in the lambing shed and kneel down in each of the pens. And if you get wet knees, then it's too wet. That's the simplest test for bedding. But yeah, shavings instead of straw is fine and can be quite good. Somebody asked how to sterilize ropes and snares, and I personally would use Milton, or the liquid that they use for baby bottles, like a Milton, and I'd have a big vat of that in your lambing shed that you put tubes in. Have a separate one for lambing equipment, snares, and that sort of thing. Right. Somebody asked, could Emma outline the reasons whether a switch to an outdoor lambing system would be considered, or whether you have considered that as an alternative or as a trial? Actually, I know you have. You have lambed outside quite often, haven't you? With groups.
Yeah, actually, well, we used to be back in 2000. Could we go back to the number slides?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry. In essence, so yeah, so we used to have a hybrid system where they went out during the day and came in at night, and we stopped that in 2000, and COVID, I think, was the first. What's that? See that the decrease from 165 to 101. I can't see the year. That was 2022. No, so that's not the right year. Sorry. Yeah, 165 to 101. So we used, yes, that's right. Sorry, get my brain in gear. We had a hybrid system. It used to go out during the day, come in during the night. And in 2022, we kept them all indoors, and that's only because we had the shed space to do it. And what we found when they were going outside during the days, there was so much other stuff going on, we would lose lambs outside. And the decrease in wet deaths from 165 to 101 was a lot to do with not losing lambs outside. And it would often be the third triplet that we would lose. But I have toyed with it. I think there's many, many, many reasons why I would love to lamb outside. I'm maybe not big enough or bold enough quite yet to do it. But it's certainly something that I wouldn't discount in the future. If we had, especially if we had the grass, we're going through a bit of a rework on our grassland as well. If we have the grass in place, we have the breed of sheep in place that could do it. I know we do. I wouldn't discount it. So 1 year, I'll give it a go when I have when I have the big and bold enough.
Thanks, Emma. There's a couple of questions about which milk powder is best, and I think it's best for that is there was a publication in the Vet Record last year, maybe the year before, where Claustrum powders were compared. More than happy to share that graph, but contact the NSA. I haven't got a slide of that, but that's a couple of those questions about which Clostrums are the best. A treatment for joint ill, it's very important when we look at antibiotic resistance data. Streptococcus galactii is the cause, and we almost always have resistant Streptococcus galactii to a tetracycline. So I would never use oxytetracycline to treat a lamb with joint ill. I would use a white penicillin, pretty much probably amoxicillin. You want to get the ewan lamb in, and you want to treat the reason the joint ill is it's an arthritis. So as you get pus in the joint, and joints have a very bad blood supply, very poor blood supply. So when you inject an antibiotic into an animal, it's then travelled by the blood. Because the joint has a poor blood supply, getting the antibiotic to kill the bugs is not simple, and you need to go on for a long time. So treating a joint ill lamb, you need to give a course of 8 or 10 days of something like an amoxicillin, and to give some painkiller as well, some pain relief, like a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory such as Metacam. So talk to your vet if you need to treat lambs for joint ill, but do not use oxytetracycline. Emma, someone here asked what your lambing percentage was last year. Can you remember?
Lambing, so lambing
scanning percentage.
So scanning, so yeah, so scanning, we were about 190%.
190.
Yeah, the scanning's gone down as we've changed breeds, but we're absolutely comfortable. Absolutely comfortable with that.
Because you're wanting two lambs a ewe, not so many triplets, aren't you?
Exactly. Yeah.
No, the days of 300 pet lambs, none of us want to go back to that. Okie doke. Somebody here asks about tubing lambs. So I've already said about caution with tubing lambs, and tubing may damage esophagus. The best is always to get a lamb to suckle itself, or to drink from a teat. If you have to tube, then as much care as possible. But and so you're using a sterile stomach tube. So often, how many times have you been into a lambing shed and seen stomach tubes lying around, and they go from one lamb to another? You just have to think of stringent hygiene. So a sterile tube, but also make sure there's no sharp edges, and no just as smooth as possible, because damage will definitely be then a route for bacteria to get in the blood supply. So somebody asked about the best colostrum. If you're asking questions about the best colostrum, I will send the graph that was published in the Vet Record of the different types of colostrum, and so contact the NSA for that. Somebody asked the best treatment for watery mouth. If you've actually got a lamb with watery mouth, they've got septicemia. So an oral antibiotic is not. You need the bug has got into the bloodstream, which is why they're floppy and they start salivating. So an injectable antibiotic and an anti-inflammatory because of the endotoxemia. Please do, if you're asking treatments, please do go and speak to your vet. Okay, I know it's 8:05. I really don't want us to go on a long time. Oh, just somebody's just asking about tail docking and castrating here. Emma, what would you what's your timing for tail docking and castrating? at Harle Farm?
So they'd be done before turnout. So within sort of 48 hours, 72 hours, they'd be tailed
So
up.
The principles there are, if you don't have to castrate or tail dock, then please don't. And it may be you've got fast growing single lambs that are going to be away and they may not need castrating, or they may not need docking. If you do need to castrate and tail dock, then make sure that lamb has had adequate colostrum. So the key importance to a lamb is to have good mothering, get the colostrum into them, and then and if you can use a local anaesthetic whilst putting the ring on, you will see less problems and it will stop the lamb. It will be less of a serious effect on the lamb, stopping it drinking colostrum. So I think we're going to have to stop there. Maybe the other Emma can tell me if there's anything important that I've missed that I should have gone for.
In terms of questions?
Yeah.
I
Oh,
think
sorry, not me.
I think at the moment you've answered everything important, but we can take some offline and give some written responses if that's helpful.
Yeah, I think that's probably best, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think let's just I think it just remains, Emma, for me to say I leave this there for people to access the Schellenberg webinar and the Blue Tongue webinar if they possibly can. Emma, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your experiences. I know that it's been a long and sometimes emotional journey, hasn't it? It's been a big, and that there's always more that we can do, isn't there? But you've got a great team there and you're a brilliant leader. So yeah, I really appreciate you sharing your experiences. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you for asking.
Thanks all, and thank you Emma and Fiona for presenting tonight. That was really, really good.
Thanks.